Hello. Don't and introduce everybody. Don't do that.
Is it working?
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. My name is James Perillo. I work at Figment. I'm on the protocol team as well as we have run the investing at Figment Capital, and we have a great panel of folks here I'll quickly let them introduce themselves. Do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, I'm Vanessa Gourlay. I'm the head of portfolio growth at CoinFund. Prior to joining CoinFund, I worked for 5 years at Consensus and in financial services.
Hey, I'm Darren Kong. I'm the VP of Operations at Penumbra, which is a shielded layer 1 AMM in the Cosmos ecosystem, which basically just means it's a private DEX that's its own blockchain. Happy to be here.
Everyone, my name is Jeff Bissinger. I lead product for a company called Satori. We're building a Web2 API on the Near protocol to mint some NFTs.
Awesome. And so the topic for today is sort of like privacy, confidentiality, anonymity. We were going to talk about KYC, but we took that out. And so, obviously we're all here because we love blockchain, and there's a lot of things that we love about it. It's decentralized and democratizes finance. But on the other hand, the technology leaves a lot to be desired because from a transparency perspective, it fails to meet a lot of fundamental privacy things that we find are important. And so our talk today is to discuss the importance of privacy, whether privacy or transparency will be essential to mainstream adoption, and some potential solutions offering privacy guarantees. Okay, cool. So I guess first and foremost is what is privacy or what isn't privacy? And so to me, it's something that we don't think about every day, but to me, privacy is really about consent. Who do I who do I choose to share my information with, and who do I choose not to share my information with? And so that's sort of how I think about it. Jeff, how do you think about privacy?
So I think privacy is just an interesting topic overall with blockchain because it's a public ledger. It's interested for where we go with this conversation. But when I think about privacy, it's all about what are you willing to share with whomever you're interacting with? And so I would love to actually dig into the power of NFTs when it comes to privacy. But when I think about it, it is simply what do I want to share? And just being very conscious of what you are sharing.
Yeah, I'll add on to that I think when we're talking about privacy, the key thing we're talking about is we're living in a world of bits, right? And so information is always leaking out in whatever we're doing. In any type of transaction that we're having cryptographically, it's ultimately a series of zeros and ones. And do I want that type of bit exchange to be leaked, and to whom? Right? So privacy should be a grading scale, but it's ultimately predicated on we are exchanging information fundamentally.
Yeah, for me, privacy is disclosing who you are and then disclosing what you do and who can see that, right? So if we think of the world we live in today, I consider that everything that I do is public because in essence it is. We're surveilled. People know where we are. People know what we do. As soon as you're online, your information is out there. You're spreading your information. So for me, privacy on the blockchain side of things is, am I able to, first of all, is my wallet identified with me, or my identity or my, enterprise? And then everything that I do with this wallet, who can see it? And right now, everything is public. And sometimes you see that people are doxxed, and then, whatever they have done, everyone can see and go back and see what they've done. So the fundamental question is that what we want? Or do we want some protocols that allow us to shield some of the information, whether it's the transaction or the identity, and reduce the risk of violation of privacy?
Yeah, so don't like walk around my house with the shades up all day. Sometimes I pull them down. I lock the door for my house.
What are you hiding, James?
Well, that's actually a really interesting question, right? Like that question of like, well, if I didn't have anything to hide, like then what's the problem? And it actually, the question essentially, I think, puts things in a weird light where ultimately what it's suggesting is that like it turns the focus on the person who is trying to preserve their privacy versus essentially asking like, well, why do I need to know all of this stuff about that person? And it sort of makes like inherently there's like suspicion now because I don't want to share something. Well, why don't you want to share something? Do you have something to hide? And so when we talk about privacy, I think there's like essentially two aspects of it. The first is anonymity, like you said, Vanessa, right? Which is who can someone tell that this is me? And then the second part is confidentiality, which is can someone tell that what I'm doing, like maybe who I'm transacting with or what I'm trading, right? And so with blockchain, I think there's like sort of a beginning understanding that like at first glance it's anonymous, right? Like I can create a wallet out of nowhere, and I can immediately generate an address, and nobody knows where that address came from or who created it. So is my privacy protected in that instance? And like, how is it possible for people to know who I am?
Well, just following up on that notion of like, why do we want privacy to begin with? And just extending like this metaphor of information and using that as a framework for how we're interacting with the world. I think fundamentally, maybe you disagree with this, but I personally believe that information wants to be free, right? So information is constantly leaking, and there's a reason why. Like it fundamentally like is entropic to some degree, right? So just by existing, information is communicating out to random parties, right? And so by default, I think information is moving towards being open and being transparent. And I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily, right? But do we want all of our information to always be moving towards public transparency? I think the answer for most people is no. So I just wanted to like kind of make that supposition first before answering like the blockchain specific parts.
I think though there has to be a fine line between what is completely private and confidential versus what absolutely has to be disclosed. Because what we're seeing today is so much of this anonymity in the space is just leading to a lot of people, like new entrants specifically into it, really just being on the other side of a bad deal. And the people on the anonymous side are scot-free, going off to go do their own thing and going off to their next venture, which they're calling these things. So I think that while yes, we don't walk around our houses with the shades closed all day, every day, I do think that we need to have some type of systems in place to open up the doors a little bit more.
So how would you do that?
It's really hard. The people that want to be highly private and very confidential in whatever they're doing, they can be quite sophisticated. But also back to the question about like everything is public. So let's say I think you mentioned ENS names. So I've purchased my ENS name and I've transferred it to several different wallets over time, but anybody can actually track that transaction. So really none of my information is private at this point because I made that one transaction. So I don't know what the answer is.
But that was a choice,
a
right?
Total choice, yes.
So the issue is, what if the system that is created, like by default, doesn't allow you for that choice, right? If the default is privacy and then you can disclose, that's fine. But I don't think we're in that case.
I don't think so either. Well, it didn't like we have a luxury of like living in a world where like we live in a free, like sort of a free world, right? Where like the transactions that we make are maybe not deemed illegal, and it's a little troubling when there's like an immutable record of all of the transactions that I've ever entered into, once I get doxxed, right? Like all my dirty laundry can be aired, and it never goes away. And so in other places where freedom is less prevalent than it is here, there's people who actually need some level of anonymity just in order to transact the way that they may want or may need to.
And we can draw the parallel with sort of the European legislation, the right to be forgiven or forgotten, and that's a really important principle. Like you could make mistakes. Does everyone need to know about your mistakes? I don't know.
Yeah, and so I mean that actually brings on a different part of anonymity for crypto, which is like off-chain anonymity, like on Twitter. We're one of these community industry that like people can get jobs, they can contribute to projects, they can launch chains and be fully like kind of be anonymous. So how do you feel about individuals wanting anonymity while working and building in the space?
I guess what I'll say is that I think a lot of the problem is how many of the I'm a former product manager, so how many of the jobs to be done are like bundled in terms of your identity space, right? Like there are certain parts of my identity that I want to be transparent. There's certain parts like, oh, you know, Darren's a weeb and I don't want everyone to know that I really like anime, right? It's like I don't necessarily want that to be bundled with my professional life and my LinkedIn profile, right? But the way that we're operating currently is like Facebook and Google and our MetaMask wallet are kind of all encompassing like identity spaces, right? And so I think the future, you know, and hopefully cryptographic technologies and facilitate this. The future is more granularity with what I want to share to whom and about what part of my identity. So a certain amount of transactions may be relevant to a certain set of parties, say an NFT, I want to be able to talk to all my Bored Apes, right? But I don't necessarily want that to blend into my professional workspace in my like Slack Connect. But if we don't have the tools to separate those properly and everything is bundled because everything is open and composable, how do we move forward from there? It can be very helpful to be open and composable, but it also has drawbacks. So what I think the penumbra model for this is there should be the ability to disclose certain aspects of your transaction to certain people. And you should be able to generate proofs. You should be able to use different types of addresses and keys for different types of transactions as necessary. And being able to like slide this gradation scale a little bit more with specificity.
Privacy first.
Yeah, I like I like the fact that people can be anonymous as contributors. I think it really stems from the idea that you can run a node, you can contribute to a protocol, and no one needs to know what your life is, and no one really cares, right? The thing that we see now with the push to consumers and NFTs, so getting more real life sort of projects and things that are more related to Web2, and then also the fact that we see leaders emerging that are anonymous is pushing that narrative to a place where it doesn't really work. Because if you're just a contributor and you're contributing code and you're doing that and other people are verifying, that's fine. If you're a leader of a project, you have responsibilities. So it's very hard to be anonymous, and people want to know that you're not a fraudster, right? And there's people behind those addresses. So I think there could be a two-tier system where when you have a majority of the tokens of a project, or when you have a responsibility, when you lead something, you might want to disclose like some basic things. I mean, the corporate world created those rules just because of that, because if you want someone to lead your project or your company, you want to know if that person has gone to prison or has been convicted. So there's that tension now, I think, and I think more transparency might be more interesting.
I think you're spot on with that. It's like just a almost like a set standard of transparency that needs to be the expectation for a lot of these projects. Because right now the expectation really is like, I want to be anonymous because we can. But I like your thought on that.
It's like it actually helps with merit. It's like a little bit of a meritocracy, right? Like you can be anonymous and you can still contribute, and your contributions, you'll be valued based on the contributions that you make to the space, not on who you are or what you look like, or who you love. And anonymity also like protects vulnerable and like vulnerable people and people who are like marginalized. But it also protects grifters and people and scam artists. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword. And so it's interesting. Do you think that like anonymous teams have like a higher bar? Do they have to like, I mean, I would assume they have a higher bar to like, to like be considered like, to win confidence from investors? Like, would you invest in a?
So on the
anonymous
investment
team?
side, you know, it takes a lot for investors to get comfortable with anons, and there's a lot of discussions with them before people get comfortable in that investment. So it's, you know, people stay private, but there's a lot of discussion.
I think we're done.
Oh, are we done? Okay. Darn, we're like halfway through. Anyway, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Darren. If you have questions for any of these folks, they'll be around today. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, guys.